At 2:47 a.m., billionaire Evan Thorne sent a text that would change everything. "I want to sleep with you tonight." The recipient? His ex-wife, who hadn't heard from him in 12 years. Madeline Royce stared at her phone screen, her heart racing. The name she hadn't seen flash across her notifications since 2012 was suddenly there, bold and impossible to ignore. Evan Thorne. The man who had built a tech empire, accumulated billions, and become one of America's most powerful CEOs. The same man who had walked out of her life without a backward glance over a decade ago. Have you ever wondered what you'd do if someone from your past suddenly reappeared with a confession that shook you to your core? Have you ever felt that jolt of recognition when a name from your history unexpectedly surfaces? That mixture of shock, curiosity, and old wounds suddenly reopening? For Madeline, this wasn't just any late-night message. This was the ghost of her greatest love story and her most devastating heartbreak, reaching across 12 years of absolute silence. No birthday wishes, no holiday greetings, no acknowledgement that they had ever shared a life, a bed, or dreams of changing the world together. The message was raw, direct, vulnerable in a way that the Evan she once knew would never have allowed himself to be. The Evan she remembered was calculated, controlled, always thinking 3 moves ahead. But this felt like a man stripped of all pretense, laying his desire bare at nearly 3 a.m. But here's what makes this story extraordinary. This wasn't just about physical longing. Those 7 words, "I want to sleep with you tonight," carried the weight of years of regret, missed opportunities, and a love that had been buried but never truly died. What could drive a man who seemingly had everything? Wealth beyond measure, influence that shaped industries, respect from world leaders, to risk it all with such a raw confession? What happens when success becomes meaningless because the one person who mattered most is no longer there to share it with? The answer lies in a story that began 20 years ago at a tech conference in San Francisco, where 2 brilliant minds collided and created magic. A story of meteoric success, devastating loss, and the kind of love that refuses to stay buried, no matter how deep you try to bury it. Let me ask you something. Have you ever received a message that made you question everything you thought you knew about your past? Drop a comment and share your story. Because what happened between Evan and Madeline will make you rethink everything you believe about love, timing, and second chances. What could drive a man to break 12 years of silence? The answer will change how you see love and regret forever. September 2003. The annual Tech Forward conference in San Francisco was buzzing with the energy of innovation. Venture capitalists prowled the halls looking for the next big thing, while entrepreneurs pitched their visions with the desperation of true believers. Among the crowd of suits and startup dreams, 2 people were about to collide in a way that would reshape both their destinies. Evan Thorne stood at the back of Conference Room B, laptop balanced on his forearm, frantically debugging code for his presentation. At 26, he possessed the kind of raw technical brilliance that could see solutions where others saw impossibilities. His idea was revolutionary, a social networking platform that would connect people not just through friendships, but through shared professional goals and collaborative projects. The problem? He had exactly 0 marketing experience and the presentation skills of a nervous graduate student. 30 feet away, Madeline Royce was commanding attention without even trying. At 24, she had already transformed 3 struggling brands into market leaders through campaigns that didn't just sell products, they sold dreams. Her latest work for a struggling coffee chain had turned them into a cultural phenomenon, proving she understood something fundamental about human connection that most marketers missed entirely. When Evan's presentation crashed spectacularly, his demo froze, his slides disappeared, and his backup plan involved frantically scribbling on a whiteboard. Most of the audience began filing out. But Madeline stayed. She watched this brilliant, flustered man explain his vision with such passion that technical failures became irrelevant. She saw what others missed. The idea wasn't just good, it was world-changing. After his disastrous presentation, Evan found her waiting by the coffee station. Your platform could revolutionize how people think about professional networking, she said simply, but your pitch needs work. That conversation lasted 4 hours. They moved from the conference center to a nearby cafe, then to a bookstore, then to a park overlooking the bay. Evan shared his vision of connecting minds across the globe, while Madeline outlined how to make that vision irresistible to both users and investors. Their minds seemed to complete each other's thoughts, building ideas that neither could have conceived alone. By midnight, they had sketched out a complete marketing strategy on napkins and coffee-stained notebook paper. By 2 a.m., they were planning how to revolutionize not just social networking, but the entire concept of professional collaboration. By dawn, they both knew they had found something rare, a true intellectual equal. The late-night sessions became routine. Evan would code until his eyes burned, then call Madeline to walk through user experience challenges. She would craft messaging strategies that captured his technical vision in language that felt human and urgent. They pushed each other to think bigger, aim higher, risk more. Within 6 months, their professional partnership had evolved into something deeper. Evan had never met someone who could match his intensity about changing the world. Madeline had never encountered a mind that could build solutions as fast as she could identify problems. They weren't just falling in love. They were recognizing their other half. Novalink launched in beta 18 months later, and the response was explosive. Users weren't just joining, they were evangelizing. The platform that began as Evan's awkward presentation had become Madeline's marketing masterpiece, combining his technical innovation with her understanding of human psychology. Their wedding in 2005 overlooked the same Pacific Ocean where they had spent countless evenings planning their future. The ceremony was intimate, 50 guests who understood they weren't just witnessing a marriage, but the union of two visionaries who had decided to build both a life and a legacy together. "We're not just promising to love each other," Evan said in his vows, looking directly into Madeline's eyes. "We're promising to dream together, create together, and change the world together." He explained to Madeline that the reason the real Bobby was in the galley was because of her, and he explained that to her. "Two brilliant minds, one unstoppable vision," Madeline replied, her voice steady with conviction. The guests didn't just witness a wedding that day. They witnessed the birth of what everyone believed would become one of history's greatest partnerships. Two people who had found their perfect match, ready to conquer the world hand in hand. None of them could have predicted that within 6 years that same unstoppable partnership would become the very thing that destroyed their marriage. By 2006, Novalink had become more than just a platform. It was a phenomenon. What started as Evan's vision and Madeline's marketing strategy had exploded into something neither had dared to dream. The user base doubled every 3 months, venture capital firms competed to throw money at them, and tech publications couldn't write about the future of social networking without mentioning their name. Madeline's campaigns didn't just advertise Novalink, they created a movement. Her Connect Your Dreams series turned users into evangelists, sharing stories of collaborations that launched careers, partnerships that built companies, and connections that changed lives. She understood something fundamental. People didn't want another social network. They wanted to be part of something transformative. The genius was in how she positioned Novalink as essential rather than optional. Her messaging made it clear that this wasn't just about networking. It was about unlocking human potential. "Your next breakthrough is just one connection away" became more than a tagline. It became a promise that millions believed. Evan, meanwhile, kept building. Every user complaint became a feature enhancement. Every technical challenge became an opportunity to push boundaries. He worked 18-hour days, coding solutions that kept the platform ahead of every competitor. His technical innovations weren't just impressive, they were revolutionary, creating user experiences that felt magical. Together, they were unstoppable. Evan would identify what users needed before they knew they needed it, and Madeline would craft messaging that made those features feel inevitable. Board meetings became performances where they finished each other's sentences. their synchronization so perfect that investors often forgot they were watching two separate people. The media fell in love with their story. Forbes called them the partnership that's reshaping Silicon Valley. Fortune featured them on the cover with the headline, "When Brilliant Minds Collide." They appeared on conference stages together, their presentations seamless collaborations that left audiences convinced they were witnessing the future of business partnership. The money followed the acclaim. By 2007, Novalink was valued at over $1 billion. By 2008, major corporations were integrating Novalink's technology into their hiring processes, project management systems, and strategic planning initiatives. What had begun as a social networking platform had evolved into infrastructure for how the professional world connected. Their personal life seemed equally perfect. They bought a modernist home in Palo Alto, hosted dinner parties where tech luminaries debated the future over wine and locally sourced cuisine. Photographs from these gatherings showed Evan and Madeline as the center of gravity, their obvious connection making everyone around them feel like they were witnessing something special. But success at this scale required sacrifice. The 18-hour days became 20-hour days. Weekend brainstorming sessions became routine. Vacations were working trips where they met with international expansion teams. Their conversations increasingly focused on user acquisition metrics, competitive analysis, and scaling challenges. The shift was subtle at first. Evan began taking calls during their morning coffee conversations. Madeline started scheduling meetings during their previously sacred evening walks. They told themselves this was temporary, the natural growing pains of building something extraordinary. What they didn't recognize was how their perfect partnership was slowly becoming perfectly imbalanced. Evan's role as CEO meant every major decision ultimately required his approval. Madeline's marketing expertise, while crucial, began feeling secondary to the technical challenges that consumed more of his attention. The warning signs were small but persistent. Conversations about their future began focusing exclusively on the company's future. Their shared dreams started sounding more like business plans than life plans. The passion that had brought them together was being channeled entirely into their professional collaboration, leaving less and less for their personal connection. By 2009, Novalink had 300 million users, offices on 6 continents, and a valuation that made Evan and Madeline two of the youngest billionaires in history. They had built exactly what they promised, an empire that changed how the world connected. What they hadn't noticed was that in building their empire, they had forgotten to protect the foundation it was built on, their love for each other. The year 2009 marked a turning point that neither Evan nor Madeline saw coming. Novalink's success had attracted the attention of major competitors, and suddenly they weren't just building a company, they were fighting a war on multiple fronts. Google was developing a rival platform, Facebook was expanding into professional networking, and startups with venture capital backing were launching Novalink clones weekly. Evan's response was total immersion. He began arriving at the office before sunrise and leaving after midnight. Weekend strategy sessions became mandatory. He hired teams of analysts to monitor competitor moves in real time, product managers to accelerate feature development, and engineers to work around the clock ensuring Novalink stayed ahead of every threat. "We're not just competing for market share," he told the board during a tense quarterly meeting. "We're fighting for survival. Every day we're not expanding is a day our competitors are gaining ground." This mindset consumed him entirely. Conversations with Madeline about their future together were replaced by urgent discussions about market penetration in Asia, regulatory challenges in Europe, and acquisition opportunities in emerging markets. The man who had once spent hours asking about her day now interrupted her mid-sentence to take calls from investors in different time zones. Madeline watched the transformation with growing alarm. The collaborative partnership that had defined their relationship, both personal and professional, was becoming a hierarchy where Evan's vision took precedence over everything else. Her marketing insights, once valued as equally important as his technical expertise, were now treated as supporting elements to his larger strategic agenda. The first major crack appeared during what should have been a celebration. Novalink had just reached 500 million users, a milestone they had dreamed about since their early days. Madeline had planned a quiet dinner at their favorite restaurant, the same place where they had celebrated their first major investment round years earlier. She arrived to find Evan on a conference call with the Tokyo development team, holding up one finger to indicate he needed just 5 more minutes. Those 5 minutes became 30. The celebration dinner became a rushed meal between phone calls. When she finally asked him to put the phone away, his response was devastating. "This acquisition could define our entire Asian strategy. Can't this wait?" That night, lying in bed while Evan worked on his laptop beside her, Madeline realized she was becoming a stranger in her own marriage. The man who had once been fascinated by her thoughts, her dreams, her perspectives on everything from user psychology to their shared future, now seemed to view her as an interruption to more important priorities. The pattern accelerated through 2010. Evan's obsession with expansion meant every conversation eventually returned to business. Their morning coffee talks became status updates on marketing campaigns. Their evening walks were replaced by investor calls that couldn't wait until business hours. Romantic dinners became working meals where Evan reviewed competitor analysis while Madeline sat across from him, increasingly invisible. Lynn began feeling like a supporting actor in what had once been their shared story. Her role as chief marketing officer remained important to the company, but her role as Evan's partner, the person whose insights had helped build Novalink from the beginning, was disappearing. She found herself scheduling appointments with her own husband just to discuss major life decisions. The loneliness was suffocating. She would wake up to find Evan already gone to early morning meetings. She would return home to find him on calls that would last until she went to bed alone. Weekends became extensions of weekdays, with Evan treating their home as a secondary office, where important decisions couldn't be interrupted by domestic concerns. Their physical intimacy vanished first. Exhausted from 18-hour workdays, Evan would collapse into bed without acknowledgement that Madeline was even there. Then their emotional intimacy followed. Conversations became transactional. Logistics about schedules, brief updates about work, practical matters that required coordination. The most painful part was watching Evan become energized by challenges that had nothing to do with her. He would light up during strategy sessions, become animated when discussing technical innovations, show genuine excitement about new market opportunities. But when she tried to engage him about their relationship, their future together, or anything beyond business metrics, his attention would drift to his phone within minutes. By 2011, they were strangers sharing living space. Madeline realized that while Evan had gained the whole world, a global platform, billions in revenue, influence that shaped industries, he was losing the relationship that had made all of it possible. But pointing this out only led to arguments where he accused her of not understanding the pressures he faced, and she accused him of forgetting that she had faced those same pressures alongside him. The final straw came when Evan missed their 6th wedding anniversary because of an emergency board meeting that could have been rescheduled. Sitting alone at their anniversary dinner, Madeline understood that success without connection had become meaningless for both of them. Let me ask you something that might hit close to home. Have you ever watched work consume someone you love? Have you seen ambition destroy the very relationships that made success worth pursuing? Share your experience in the comments, because what happened next between Evan and Madeline shows us the real cost of choosing achievement over connection. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in March 2011. Madeline had been awake since 4 a.m., staring at the ceiling while Evan slept beside her, his phone buzzing intermittently with messages from the London office. She had spent months trying to find the right words, the perfect moment, the ideal circumstances to have the conversation that would either save their marriage or end it. But perfect moments don't exist when you're living with someone who has forgotten you exist. When Evan woke up and immediately reached for his phone, checking overnight developments before acknowledging her presence, Madeline knew the moment had arrived. Not because it was perfect, but because she couldn't endure another day of being invisible in her own life. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Evan glanced up from his screen, already distracted. Can it wait until tonight? The Frankfurt team is dealing with a server crisis and I need to... No, Madeline interrupted, her voice steady but final. It cannot wait. It's waited too long already. The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours and changed everything. There was no screaming, no accusations, no dramatic confrontations. Instead, there was something far more devastating, complete honesty about what they had become. Madeline spoke first, her words measured and clear. She explained how she had watched the man she loved disappear behind walls of ambition and expansion plans. How she had tried to support his vision while losing herself in the process. How she had become a supporting character in what had once been their shared story. Evan's response was equally honest and infinitely more heartbreaking. He admitted that somewhere along the way he had stopped seeing her as his partner and started seeing her as part of his responsibilities. He had convinced himself that building their empire was how he showed love, that providing security and success was the same as providing attention and connection. I thought I was doing this for us, he said, his voice breaking for the first time in months, but I lost track of what us actually meant. The realization that settled over both of them was devastating. They still loved each other, but they had become incompatible with each other. Evan couldn't step back from the demands of running a global platform, and Madeline couldn't continue living as an afterthought in her own marriage. They made the decision together, with the same collaborative spirit that had once built their empire. The divorce would be handled privately, with mutual respect and dignity. Neither would speak publicly about their personal relationship. They would protect each other's reputations and the company they had built together. The legal proceedings took 4 months and were conducted with remarkable grace. They divided assets equitably, ensured Novalink's stability, and handled every detail with the professionalism that had made them successful business partners. But the emotional proceedings were far more complex. Their final conversation took place in the same Palo Alto cafe where they had spent countless hours planning their future together. It was August 2011, and the divorce papers had been signed that morning. I want you to know, Evan said, struggling to maintain composure, that losing you is the biggest mistake I've ever made. But I also know that I can't be the husband you deserve while trying to be the CEO this company needs. Madeline's response would haunt him for the next 12 years. The tragedy isn't that you chose the company over me, Evan. The tragedy is that you convinced yourself you had to choose at all. They parted ways that afternoon with a handshake, formal, final, and completely inadequate for the magnitude of what they were ending. Neither knew that this would be their last conversation for over a decade. That night, Madeline booked a one-way flight to New York. The next morning, Evan threw himself into work with an intensity that made his previous obsession look casual. Both of them had chosen their separate paths with dignity and grace. Neither understood that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The years following their divorce became a masterclass in how success can feel like failure when you're experiencing it alone. Both Evan and Madeline threw themselves into their separate ambitions, with the fervor of people trying to outrun their own hearts. Evan's response to losing Madeline was to double down on everything that had cost him his marriage. If building Novalink had consumed him before, expanding it became his complete identity afterward. He launched into artificial intelligence development with a vengeance, acquiring smaller AI companies and integrating machine learning capabilities that made Novalink feel almost telepathic in understanding user needs. By 2014, Novalink wasn't just a social platform, it was an ecosystem. The AI component could predict professional partnerships before users even realized they needed them. The Renewable Energy Division, launched in 2016, powered data centers with solar and wind technology that made Novalink carbon negative. The platform facilitated not just connections, but actual collaborations that generated billions in economic activity. Forbes declared him the architect of the new economy in 2018. Time magazine featured him on their cover with the headline, "The Billionaire Who Changed How We Work." His net worth crossed $15 billion, making him one of the 30 richest people in America. He spoke at Davos, advised governments on digital policy, and had presidents calling him for counsel on technological infrastructure. But every achievement felt hollow. Evan would stand on conference stages, receiving standing ovations from thousands of people, and feel utterly alone. The innovations that earned him global recognition were developed in late-night sessions, where he found himself wondering what Madeline would think of his latest breakthrough. The business victories that should have felt triumphant instead felt like elaborate distractions from the emptiness that had settled in his chest. Meanwhile, Madeline had built her own empire in New York. Her consultancy, Roy's Strategic, became the go-to firm for companies wanting to humanize their brand messaging. She developed methodologies for authentic connection that helped organizations build genuine relationships with their customers. Her client list included Fortune 500 companies, political campaigns, and nonprofits seeking to create movements rather than just marketing campaigns. Her speaking career exploded in 2017 when her TED Talk, The Connection Paradox, went viral. She argued that in an age of unprecedented connectivity, people were more isolated than ever, and that authentic leadership required vulnerability rather than perfection. The talk garnered over 20 million views and established her as one of the most sought-after voices on leadership and human connection. By 2020, she was commanding six-figure speaking fees, had written 2 best-selling books, and was regularly featured on panels with world leaders and cultural icons. Harvard Business School offered her a permanent position. The United Nations appointed her as an advisor on global communication strategies. She had achieved everything she had dreamed of during those early conversations with Evan about changing the world. Yet the success felt incomplete. Every standing ovation reminded her of the one person whose approval she had never stopped craving. Every breakthrough in her understanding of human connection made her think of the connection she had lost. She helped countless organizations build authentic relationships while struggling with the memory of the most authentic relationship she had ever experienced. The cruel irony was that both had become exactly what they had promised to become during their marriage: global influencers who shaped how people connected and worked. But they had achieved this by destroying the very connection that had made it all possible. Evan would read articles about Madeline's latest speaking engagement and feel a mixture of pride and profound loss. Her insights into human connection had clearly deepened over the years, but he couldn't help wondering if some of that wisdom had come from the pain of their separation. Madeline would see Evan's name in business headlines and feel the same complex emotions. His technical innovations had revolutionized how people worked together. But she knew that the man building tools for global collaboration was himself isolated from meaningful personal connections. Both had become prisoners of their own success. Evan's wealth and influence meant that everyone wanted something from him, making genuine relationships nearly impossible. Madeline's expertise and connection meant that people sought her guidance constantly, but rarely offered her the vulnerability that real friendship required. They had spent 12 years building separate empires, accumulating achievements that should have brought satisfaction. Instead, they had created elaborate monuments to their shared loss, successful, influential, and completely empty of the joy that had once defined their lives together. Neither realized that the other was experiencing the same hollow victories, the same meaningless achievements, the same desperate longing for something that all their success couldn't provide, the person who had once made winning feel worthwhile. The catalyst came on a February evening in 2023, during what should have been Evan's greatest triumph. He was standing in the main ballroom of the Four Seasons in Manhattan, surrounded by world leaders, tech luminaries, and media moguls who had gathered to celebrate Novalink's 20th anniversary. The platform now connected over 2 billion people globally, and the evening speakers had spent 3 hours praising Evan's vision, innovation, and impact on human civilization. As the final speaker concluded with, "Evan Thorne didn't just build a company, he built the infrastructure for how humanity connects," the room erupted in applause. 1,000 people were celebrating him, but Evan felt completely alone. The realization hit him with devastating clarity. He had spent 20 years helping other people connect, while systematically disconnecting from everyone who mattered to him. He was being celebrated for revolutionizing human relationships while living in complete emotional isolation. That night, Unable to sleep, Evan found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. Looking through old photographs on his laptop. Most were business, product launches, board meetings, conference presentations. But buried deep in a folder he rarely opened were images from another lifetime. His years with Madeline. There was a photo from their engagement party, both of them laughing at something completely forgotten but clearly hilarious. Another from a Novalink product launch where Madeline was explaining user psychology to a room of engineers, Evan watching her with obvious admiration. A candid shot from their honeymoon, where they were working on laptops on a beach, so absorbed in their shared vision that they had ignored paradise around them. But it was the last photo that broke something open in his chest. Madeline, asleep in their bed, laptop still open beside her, having fallen asleep while reviewing marketing materials. Her face was peaceful, trusting, completely vulnerable. Evan remembered taking that photo because he had been overwhelmed by love for this woman, who cared so deeply about their shared dreams that she worked until exhaustion. The man staring at that photo was unrecognizable from the person he had become. That Evan had understood that the most important thing in life wasn't the empire you built, but who you built it with. That Evan had known that success meant nothing if you experienced it alone. Sitting in his empty penthouse at 2:30 a.m., Evan realized he had become the richest, most successful, most isolated person he knew. He had everything he thought he wanted, and nothing that actually mattered. The decision to text Madeline wasn't calculated or strategic. It was desperate and raw, and completely unlike the controlled persona he had maintained for 12 years. His hands shook as he typed 7 words that would either change everything or destroy the careful distance they had maintained. I want to sleep with you tonight. He stared at the message for 20 minutes before sending it. The vulnerability required felt more terrifying than any business risk he had ever taken. This wasn't the CEO of Novalink reaching out. This was a man who had spent 12 years realizing that winning everything meant nothing if you lost the person who made winning worthwhile. 3,000 miles away, Madeline was reviewing presentation notes for a keynote speech about authentic leadership when her phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her heart stop. Evan Thorne. Her first thought was professional, maybe something about Novalink, some legal matter requiring her attention. But when she read the message, her phone nearly slipped from her hands. I want to sleep with you tonight. The words hit her like a physical force, not because they were inappropriate or unexpected, but because they were exactly what the Evan she had once known would say when he needed connection more than conversation, closeness more than physical satisfaction. Before their marriage had deteriorated, I want to sleep with you tonight had been their code for something deeper than sex. It meant, I need you close. I need to feel that we're still connected. I need to remember what it feels like to not be alone. Madeline understood immediately that this wasn't a proposition. It was a confession. Evan wasn't asking for physical intimacy. He was acknowledging that he had spent 12 years sleeping alone, in every sense that mattered, and he couldn't bear it anymore. Reaction was complex and overwhelming. Part of her felt angry that he could break 12 years of silence with such an intimate request. Part of her felt afraid of reopening wounds that had never fully healed. But the largest part of her felt recognition, because she had spent 12 years sleeping alone too, surrounded by success that felt meaningless, without someone who truly knew her to share it with. She found herself crying in her Manhattan apartment, not from sadness, but from the relief of knowing that she wasn't the only one who had been haunted by what they had lost. For 12 years, she had wondered if Evan ever thought about their connection, if he ever missed the intimacy they had shared, if he ever regretted choosing his empire over their relationship. Now she knew. He had been as empty as she was. The courage required for both of them in that moment was extraordinary. Evan had risked everything. His carefully maintained image, his professional relationship with her, the protective distance they had both relied on, by exposing his deepest need. Madeline would need equal courage to respond, knowing that whatever she said would either heal something that had been broken for 12 years or break it beyond repair. Let me ask you something that requires real honesty. Have you ever needed the courage to reach out to someone who once meant everything to you? Have you ever realized that all your achievements felt hollow because the person who made success meaningful was no longer there to share it? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you were wrong about what really matters. In the hours following that late-night message, both Evan and Madeline confronted truths they had spent 12 years avoiding. The confession had torn open carefully constructed walls, forcing them to acknowledge what their separate successes had actually cost them. For Evan, the years since their divorce had been a masterclass in learning the wrong lessons. Each business triumph had reinforced his belief that he could solve any problem through strategy, innovation, and sheer determination. He had applied this approach to every challenge: market competition, technical obstacles, regulatory hurdles, and it had worked brilliantly. But he had never applied it to the most important problem of his life: the fact that he was profoundly, devastatingly alone. The realization had been building for years, accumulating in small moments that he had tried to dismiss, standing in empty houses that felt more like showrooms than homes, attending galas where hundreds of people wanted to talk to him but none actually knew him, celebrating achievements that should have felt triumphant but instead felt hollow because there was no one whose pride in him actually mattered. The truth Evan finally acknowledged was that he had spent 12 years trying to prove that losing Madeline had been worth it. Every acquisition, every innovation, every billion added to his net worth had been an attempt to justify the choice he had made. He had convinced himself that building a global empire was a higher purpose than maintaining a marriage. But success had revealed the lie beneath this logic. He hadn't lost Madeline because he chose something more important. He had lost her because he had forgotten what importance actually meant. The empire he had built was impressive, but it was also empty. He was surrounded by people who valued his opinions, but none who truly knew his thoughts. He had influence over global markets, but no influence over the loneliness that consumed him. The message he sent wasn't really about physical desire. It was about the desperate need to feel known by someone again. "I want to sleep with you tonight" was his way of saying, "I want to stop sleeping alone," in every sense that matters. Madeline's internal struggle was equally complex. Her first instinct was self-protection. She had built a life that was successful, meaningful, and carefully insulated from the kind of pain that comes from letting someone that close again. Responding to Evan's message would require dismantling walls that had taken years to construct. But his confession had awakened something she had tried to bury: the memory of what it felt like to be truly known by another person, not admired for her achievements or respected for her expertise, but known for who she was beneath all the accomplishments. Evan had been the last person who had seen her vulnerabilities as strengths, her ambitions as beautiful rather than intimidating. The 12 years had given her perspective on their marriage that youth hadn't allowed. At 36, she had blamed Evan entirely for choosing work over relationship. At 48, she understood that they had both been trapped by success they didn't know how to manage. He had lost himself in expansion and growth, but she had enabled it by never demanding that he choose her over his empire. The possibility of healing 12-year-old wounds was both terrifying and intoxicating. Madeline realized that she had spent over a decade building expertise in human connection, while avoiding the most significant connection of her own life. She helped organizations create authentic relationships while maintaining careful distance from the relationship that had taught her what authenticity actually meant. But healing would require both of them to risk everything they had carefully protected. Evan would have to acknowledge that his approach to life, solving problems through control and strategy, had created the biggest problem he faced. Madeline would have to confront the possibility that the great love of her life might still be the great love of her life, even after 12 years of separation. The vulnerability required was staggering. Evan's confession had been the emotional equivalent of showing up naked at someone's door, completely exposed, entirely defenseless, absolutely genuine. If Madeline rejected him, he would have to live with knowing that his deepest need had been acknowledged and dismissed. For Madeline, responding would mean admitting that 12 years of success hadn't filled the space he had left behind. It would mean acknowledging that despite everything she had built, achieved, and become, part of her was still the woman who had loved Evan Thorne completely and never quite recovered from losing him. Time had provided both of them with something youth lacks: the perspective to understand that perfect love doesn't exist, but rare love does. What they had shared wasn't perfect. It had been damaged by ambition, destroyed by misplaced priorities, and ended by their inability to balance success with connection. But it had been real in a way that neither had experienced before or since. The question facing them both was whether real love could survive 12 years of separation, whether honesty could heal wounds that had never fully closed, and whether two people who had mastered everything except relationship could learn to prioritize what actually mattered. Madeline stared at Evan's message for 6 hours before responding. She wrote and deleted dozens of replies, each one feeling either too casual or too intense for a moment that had shattered 12 years of silence. Finally, at 8:47 a.m., she sent 3 words that changed everything. "I'm in town." Those words weren't just a response. They were an acceptance, not of his proposition, but of the conversation they both needed to have. She was scheduled for a consulting meeting in San Francisco the following week, but those 3 words meant she was willing to move up her timeline for this. Evan's reply came within minutes. "Pacific Cafe, tonight, 7 p.m. The same place where they had spent countless evenings during the early days of Novalink, planning their future and falling deeper in love with both their vision and each other. That evening, Madeline arrived first. She chose a corner table, the same spot where they had once sketched their dreams on napkins. When Evan walked through the door, she felt her breath catch. 12 years had changed him. Silver threading through his hair, lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. A carefully maintained composure that seemed more fragile than she remembered. But when their eyes met across the cafe, she saw something that time hadn't touched. The same intensity, the same intelligence, the same man who had once looked at her like she was the answer to questions he hadn't known he was asking. Evan sat across from her, and for several moments neither spoke. The weight of 12 years, of everything said and unsaid, of success achieved and connection lost, settled between them like a living thing. "You look," Evan began, then stopped, shaking his head. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Thank you for coming?" "I almost didn't," Madeline replied honestly. "I've spent 12 years building a life that doesn't include you. Coming here feels like risking all of that." The conversation that followed was unlike anything either had experienced in over a decade. Without the pressure of building a company, managing a marriage, or maintaining public personas, they were free to be completely honest about what the years had taught them. Evan spoke first about the emptiness that success had brought him. "I thought I was building something meaningful," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "But I realized I was just building elaborate distractions from the fact that I had lost the only person who made success actually matter." He talked about the nights he would walk through his empty house, past awards and recognitions that felt like monuments to the wrong priorities. About attending events where everyone wanted to celebrate his achievements while he felt completely disconnected from his own life. Madeline shared her own discoveries about success without connection. "I became an expert on helping others build authentic relationships while avoiding the most authentic relationship I'd ever had," she admitted. "Every speech I gave about connection reminded me of what I had lost." She described the loneliness of being known for her expertise, but not truly known as a person. How her professional success had come at the cost of personal vulnerability. How she had protected herself so completely that she had forgotten what it felt like to be genuinely close to another person. As they talked, something remarkable happened. The conversation revealed that both had become different people, wiser, more self-aware, humbled by years of hollow victories. But it also revealed that the fundamental connection between them, the intellectual and emotional chemistry that had created both Novalink and their love story, remained unchanged. They discovered that 12 years had given them something their younger selves had lacked: the ability to prioritize what actually mattered. Evan had learned that empire building meant nothing without someone to share it with. Madeline had learned that professional success was meaningless without personal connection. Most importantly, they both realized that the love they had shared hadn't died. It had been buried under ambition and misplaced priorities, but it had survived, not unchanged, but deepened by loss, and strengthened by the perspective that only time and regret can provide. By the time the cafe began closing around them, they had talked for 4 hours. The conversation hadn't solved everything. 12 years of separation couldn't be healed in a single evening, but it had accomplished something neither had expected. It had given them both permission to hope. As they prepared to leave, Evan reached across the table and touched Madeline's hand. "I know I can't undo 12 years," he said, "but I'd like to try to build something new. Not the empire this time. Just us." Madeline looked at their joined hands and felt something she hadn't experienced in over a decade: the possibility that her future might be bigger than her past. Evan and Madeline's story isn't just about two people who lost and found each other. It's a mirror reflecting truths about love, ambition, and what it means to live a meaningful life. Their journey reveals lessons that every one of us needs to understand before it's too late. The first and most powerful lesson is that success without someone to share it with is just elaborate loneliness. Evan accumulated billions, influenced global markets, and shaped how humanity connects. But he spent 12 years feeling completely disconnected from his own life. Madeline became a sought-after expert on human connection while avoiding the most meaningful connection she had ever experienced. This isn't unique to billionaires or public figures. How many people do you know who have achieved everything they thought they wanted, only to realize they feel empty? How many marriages have been destroyed by the pursuit of career advancement? How many relationships have been sacrificed on the altar of professional success? The brutal truth is that we live in a culture that teaches us to measure our worth through external achievements, while ignoring the internal connections that actually create fulfillment. We celebrate people who work 18-hour days while their relationships crumble. We admire those who climb corporate ladders while losing touch with the people who matter most. Evan and Madeline's story shows us that emotional intimacy isn't a luxury. It's the foundation that makes everything else meaningful. Without someone who truly knows you, sees you, and chooses you despite your flaws, success becomes a performance for an audience that doesn't really matter. The second lesson is about the incredible power of vulnerability. Evan's confession, "I want to sleep with you tonight," wasn't just brave because it risked rejection. It was revolutionary because it prioritized truth over image, connection over control, and authenticity over the carefully maintained persona he had spent years constructing. In our social media age, we're taught to present polished versions of ourselves, to highlight achievements while hiding struggles, to project strength while concealing needs. But real connection requires the opposite. It demands that we show up as we actually are: flawed, needy, uncertain, and human. Madeline's willingness to respond, to show up at that cafe, required equal vulnerability. She had to risk the safety of her independent life, the protection of her carefully constructed walls, and the possibility of being hurt again. Both of them discovered that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the courage to prioritize what matters most, even when the outcome is uncertain. The third lesson involves timing and the possibility of redemption. 12 years seems like an insurmountable gap, but their story proves that some connections transcend time. However, timing matters not because there are perfect moments, but because growth and perspective require time to develop. Evan and Madeline, who divorced in 2011, weren't ready for the relationship they could build in 2023. They needed those 12 years to learn what really mattered, to understand the cost of their choices, and to develop the wisdom necessary for a different kind of partnership. This offers hope for anyone carrying regret about relationships that ended badly words that were never spoken, or chances that seemed permanently lost. Sometimes the best gift you can give a connection is time. Time for wounds to heal, perspectives to shift, and priorities to clarify. The fourth lesson is about the hidden cost of misplaced priorities. Both Evan and Madeline thought they were building toward their dreams, but they were actually building away from what made those dreams meaningful. Success became their focus instead of their byproduct, and they lost sight of why they had wanted to succeed in the first place. Their story reveals a universal truth. We often sacrifice the very things that make achievement worthwhile in our pursuit of achievement itself. We miss family dinners to advance our careers, postpone meaningful conversations to handle urgent but unimportant tasks, and delay genuine connection while building impressive but hollow accomplishments. Here's what I want you to consider. If someone from your past sent you a message tonight confessing they missed you, how would you respond? When was the last time you prioritized emotional intimacy over professional advancement? What relationships have you been taking for granted while chasing goals that might not actually matter? More importantly, what would you risk for love? Not the romantic comedy version of love, but the real kind, the kind that requires you to be vulnerable, to prioritize another person's well-being alongside your own success, to choose connection even when it's inconvenient. Evan and Madeline's story reminds us that it's never too late to choose differently. It's never too late to prioritize what actually matters, to have the conversations that need to be had, or to rebuild the connections that make life meaningful. If this story has made you think about someone you've lost touch with, someone you've been taking for granted, or someone you need to have an honest conversation with, don't wait 12 years. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, leave a comment about a relationship that matters to you, and subscribe for more stories that will change how you think about love, success, and what it means to live a meaningful life. 3 months after that first conversation at Pacific Cafe, Evan and Madeline are building something entirely new. Not another empire, not another business venture, but something far more valuable, a relationship based on who they've become rather than who they used to be. Their story proves that love doesn't expire, it transforms. The connection that created Novalink, that survived divorce and 12 years of silence, that endured through hollow successes and empty achievements, has evolved into something deeper and more resilient than what they shared in their 20s. But this isn't a story about getting back together with an ex. This is a story about the courage to prioritize what actually matters, regardless of how much time has passed or how much success you've accumulated along the way. Every day, millions of people are making the same choice Evan made in 2011, choosing achievement over connection, ambition over intimacy, professional advancement over personal fulfillment. They tell themselves they're building toward a better future, but they're actually building away from the relationships that make the future worth experiencing. Evan and Madeline's story matters because it shows us that no amount of external success can compensate for internal emptiness. It reveals that the most important achievements aren't the ones that impress strangers. They're the ones that deepen your connection with the people who actually know you. Their journey reminds us that vulnerability isn't a weakness to overcome, but a strength to embrace. That timing isn't about finding perfect moments, but about having the courage to create meaningful ones. That love isn't about finding someone who completes you, but about becoming someone worthy of the love you want to receive. Most importantly, their story proves that it's never too late to choose differently. Whether you're 25 or 55, whether you've been apart for 12 years or 12 days, whether you're building your first empire or your fifth, the choice remains the same. What are you going to prioritize? The message they want you to understand is simple but revolutionary. Success means nothing if you experience it alone. Achievement becomes meaningful only when it serves connection, not when it replaces it. So here's my challenge to you. Look at your life right now. Are you building toward the relationships that matter, or are you building away from them? Are you using success to enhance your connections, or are you using it to avoid the vulnerability that real connection requires? If someone important to you sent you a message tonight, would you have the courage to respond? If you had to choose between the next promotion and the next meaningful conversation, which would you choose? Evan and Madeline's story is just one example of how love can survive time, distance, and even our own worst decisions. But their story isn't unique, it's universal. Every relationship faces the choice between connection and convenience, between intimacy and image, between what impresses others